There are stories in Asia that never make it to books. They're not written in ink, but whispered through walls, stitched into red cloth, or carried on the breath of temple winds long after the incense has gone cold. These are the stories you're not meant to find, unless you've already been chosen. Welcome to Whispers of Asia, where every tale is a prayer the dead never finished, and every silence hides something trying to speak. Tonight, we journey deep into the misty hills of northern Thailand, where a temple stands abandoned, its stone belly filled with dust, blood, and lullabies that no one sings anymore. But if you listen closely, you might hear the bell, soft, broken, echoing from beneath the earth. It rings for the midwife who was buried without silence, and for the child who was never born. This is the story of Mae Maud, the spirit midwife who once delivered life into the world and now waits to be delivered herself. Her chant was forbidden, her death unfinished, and her return inevitable. This is the last chant of Mae Maud, and once you hear it, you'll never sleep in silence again. Lada had never believed in ghosts, not really. She believed in echoes, in the way trauma leaves fingerprints on generations, in the way stories cling to old walls and never truly fade. But ghosts? No. Until now. The road to the village of Ban Nong Khun was thin and cracked like old skin. The bus had dropped her off 2 hours ago, and now she walked the rest of the way, backpack slung over one shoulder, a small recorder in her pocket, and sweat crawling down her spine. The further she went, the more the world seemed to fall silent. No cars, no birds, not even the whine of insects. Only the soft hush of bamboo brushing against itself in the wind, like breath being held. She was here for her thesis, Ritual Midwifery in Isan, Dying Traditions of Spirit-Assisted Birth, a title that sounded important, heavy, worth something. But what she really came for was a name she'd found in a forgotten side note of a 1957 anthropological report. Mae Maud, the midwife who spoke to the unborn, the one whose final chant was never finished. Lada didn't expect anyone in the village to remember the name. Most didn't. The ones who did wouldn't say it out loud. An old man at the noodle stand in the nearest town had shaken his head furiously and muttered, "Let sleeping soil stay undisturbed," whatever that meant. Still, the village appeared like a ghost of itself at the end of the path. Old wooden homes on stilts, paint peeling like skin, windows with curtains drawn tight even at midday. A single dog barked once and fell silent. Lada passed under a rusted archway marking the entrance to Ban Nong Khun, where a handmade sign declared, "Visitors must leave by dusk." She stayed at a woman's home, Auntie Samorn, a stooped figure with eyes like wet ash and hands that never stopped moving. She offered a stiff mat and a fan with broken blades, said nothing else. The next morning, Lada started asking questions. "Do you know anything about a temple nearby?" she asked a young girl selling tamarind candy by the well. The girl blinked. "Do you mean the silent one?" "What do you mean silent?" "No one hears birds when they go there. No dogs bark. You shouldn't go." She smiled politely, took her candy, wrote that down. The temple, or what was left of it, sat a mile beyond the village edge, through a forest where the trees grew too close together, their roots tangled like fingers praying underground. Locals called it Wat Mod Noi, the Temple of the Silenced Midwife. She found it on the third day, just a crumbling structure of stone and soot, hidden under vines and thyme. A Buddha statue remained, half buried and blind. There were remnants of prayer flags, now frayed and colorless, and in the far wall, a collapsed hole leading into a dark hollow. Lada felt her skin tighten. Not from fear, from a tension, the kind that isn't hers. She held up her recorder, turned it on, and whispered, "Audio log day 3. First contact with Wat Mod Noi. Structure suggests abandonment for over 50 years. No signs of formal preservation. Attempting entry." The wind picked up, gentle at first, then colder than it should have been for noon. Still, she went inside. The air smelled like stone, damp and wrong. Not decay, something more sterile, like the breath of a room no one has exhaled in. She knelt to observe the floor, where blackened lines curved in uneven circles, the remnants of old chalk maybe, or ash. She sat in the center and placed the recorder on the ground. She closed her eyes, and just for a moment, the world wasn't silent anymore. She heard a lullaby. Not music, not even words, but rhythm, like a mother humming through clenched teeth, like sound vibrating through water, pulsing with something that felt very old and very wrong. Lada opened her eyes. Nothing. She played the recording back later that night in Auntie Simorne's house. Nothing strange at first, just ambient noise, wind, her voice, a pause. Then, a bell. Soft, barely audible, but unmistakable. It rang once, then twice. She rewound it, played it again. It was there. But the recorder had no microphone strong enough to catch that sound from the distance. She hadn't heard any bells. There were no temples with bells nearby. The only bells she'd seen were rusted, nailed above doorways to keep out bad spirits, not to call them in. She showed the clip to Auntie Simorne. The old woman didn't move, didn't blink. Then she slowly reached forward and turned off the recorder. "You shouldn't have gone there," she said. "Why not?" Lada asked. Simorne's voice lowered to something almost reverent, almost afraid. "Because sound wakes what burial silenced." Lada didn't sleep well that night. She dreamed of a long hallway with no ceiling, and a woman standing barefoot in blood, holding a red scarf that would not stop unraveling. When she awoke, the recorder was on again, and the bell had rung a third time.
The path to Wat Mod Noi was not marked on any map. Lada traced it by whispers. Every time she asked someone in the village, their eyes went to the ground first. They'd point vaguely to the trees. Their hands trembled when they spoke of it, as if gestures alone could summon something. It was Auntie Simorne who finally gave her the directions, though not willingly. "You want to see the silent temple?" the old woman said after a long pause, her fingers tightening around a bowl of rice. "Then go before the sun touches the western ridge. Do not go hungry. Do not speak once you pass the fig tree with 3 trunks. And if you hear a baby cry, don't answer." Lada wrote it all down. She had heard warnings like this before. Ritual precautions, she called them. Nothing more. That afternoon, she walked the path. The air changed as she went deeper. Cooler, denser, heavy with a scent like wet soil and old copper. Trees bent inward, their branches lacing into an uneven ceiling, turning daylight into a muted dusk. She passed the fig tree with 3 trunks and stopped. The bark had been cut with hundreds of tiny marks, like tally scratches. Offerings of folded leaves lay at its roots, each leaf pinned with a thin strip of red cloth. Her chest felt tight. She kept walking. The forest swallowed her. Even her own footsteps dulled on the earth. No birds, no insects, no dogs. She pressed her fingers to her ears. The silence was not just absence of sound. It was presence. It pulsed. Then, through a thin break in the bamboo, she saw it. The temple. Wat Mod Noi rose like a black tooth from the soil, its roof sagging under moss, its walls flaked with soot and lime. The front steps had collapsed, leaving only 2 stone lions at the base, their faces eroded until they resembled eyeless infants rather than guardians. A Buddhist statue sat at the far end of the courtyard, half buried and head bowed. Prayer flags hung in tatters, each one stained a faded brown that might have once been red. Her recorder was already on. She raised her camera, but lowered it again. It felt wrong to take pictures here, as if the place itself would notice. She crossed the threshold. The moment her foot hit the cracked tiles, she felt the air shift, not colder, thicker, like stepping into water. Inside, the temple was darker than it should have been. Dust floated like ash in shafts of muted light. Murals still clung to the upper walls, scenes of women in white wrapping red scarves around their necks, bowing before a midwife seated on a mat. Children with blank faces hovered behind them. The paint had cracked where their eyes should be. She whispered into her recorder. Interior shows unique mural work, appears to depict midwife ritual. Subject may be Mae Mod. The wind rose behind her. No windows, yet something moved. Her hair lifted against her scalp. From the far end of the temple came a sound, so faint she thought she imagined it, a single note of a bell. Then silence. Then a low hum, like a woman rocking a child. She followed the sound to the collapsed hole in the far wall. A stone stairway led downward, swallowed by darkness. She crouched at the edge, shining her phone's flashlight down. The beam hit damp stone, then nothing. The air that rose from it was colder still, carrying a scent she couldn't name, metallic and sweet, like old blood mixed with milk. Her stomach turned. Audio log, day 4. Found substructure beneath the temple. Possible storage or burial chamber. Air quality poor. Investigating later. She stood. The bell rang again. This time she felt it in her teeth. Her pulse stumbled. She turned to leave, but something in the murals caught her eye. In the corner, hidden beneath soot, was a figure larger than the others. A woman kneeling beside a newborn wrapped in a red scarf, but the child was painted upside down, feet pointing skyward, head buried in the earth. Lada blinked. For a second she thought the paint moved, the scarf unraveling like a ribbon. She left quickly, nearly tripping on the threshold. Outside, the forest had gone utterly still. She glanced back at the temple once. The Buddha's head seemed lower. The prayer flags no longer moved. Back in the village, Auntie Simorn was waiting by the door. "You went," she said flatly. "Yes," Lada replied, breathless. "There's a stairway under the temple. Do you know where it leads?" Simorn's eyes flicked to the recorder at her hip. "You heard it." "The bell?" asked Lada. The old woman closed her eyes. "No, not the bell." She opened them again, and for the first time Lada saw fear there, stark and unhidden. "You heard her." That night, Lada dreamed of water. She floated in a dark pool, her body heavy and full, her mouth filled with a lullaby she did not know but could not stop singing. Something moved beneath her, pressing small hands against her skin from inside. She woke with a gasp. Her shirt was damp. Her recorder lay on the mat beside her, light blinking red. She hadn't turned it on. When she played it back, the recording was silent at first. Then a woman's voice, low and humming, speaking a dialect Lada didn't recognize. At the end, a baby cried, soft at first, then abruptly cut off, as if someone had pressed a hand over its mouth. Her hand shook. She turned to Auntie Simorn. "What is she saying?" Simorn listened, face pale. When it ended, she whispered, "She's asking whose child you carry."
Lada could still hear the voice, even with the recorder off, even in daylight. It stayed in the corners of silence, like breath behind her ears, like a lullaby stuck between memory and imagination. She told herself it was stress, isolation. The village was quiet, too quiet, and she'd been sleeping badly. That's all. She was not the kind of person who heard voices. But the words the voice spoke were not hers, and when she tried to write them phonetically, her hands trembled. By the 5th day, she needed answers. The woman who finally agreed to speak with her was nearly blind. Her name was Yai Lam Yai, one of the oldest people in the village. Auntie Simorn took Lada to her house, where time had stopped. The floorboards creaked like sighs. Herbs hung in long braids from the ceiling. A photograph of the young monk sat on a dusty altar, surrounded by coins and dried rice. "She remembers the old chants," Simorn said, "but she may not speak clearly, and she forgets." Yai Lam Yai was sitting cross-legged, her skin paper-thin, her lips sunken. When she heard Lada's name, she smiled, without teeth. "The one who woke her." Lada stiffened. "Woke who?" The old woman ignored the question. "They used to come here from the mountain villages, in the rainy season, when roads were mud and spirits walked freely. They came to her with swollen bellies and shaking hands. She always knew the sex, always, before the baby even turned. And she never slept." Lada leaned in. "Me mod?" The old woman's expression turned reverent. "The midwife who spoke between breaths. They say she didn't cry when she was born. She opened her mouth and chanted." The room seemed to darken. "They say Me Mod could keep a baby alive if it stopped breathing, but the price was always silence." Lada frowned. "Silence?" The old woman nodded slowly. "A mother must not scream, not during birth, not during the chant. If she did, the spirit would hear it, and it would enter the wrong body." Lada's throat tightened. "What spirit?" The old woman's voice dropped to a whisper. "P. Mod, not the woman, the chant. The chant was the spirit. That's what they feared." Lada turned on her recorder. "Can you say the chant?" Yai Lam Yai's lips twitched. She shook her head. "I only remembered the rhythm, but even rhythm is dangerous." She picked up a string of beads and began to tap them softly on the floor. Slow, measured, the same pace as a lullaby, the same beat Lada had heard in her dreams. "The mothers gave their afterbirths to her, wrapped in red, placed in clay urns, buried under the temple." "Why?" asked Lada. "To keep the baby's soul anchored, to stop it from wandering back to the womb. Me Mod said the world after birth was too loud. She had to sing to keep them tethered." Lada's heart pounded. "And what happened to her?" Yai Lam Yai's fingers froze. She saved too many. Silence followed. Lada waited. She began to chant even when the baby had no heartbeat. She called them back. But one day she chanted too long, too hard. The baby lived. The mother did not. The beads clicked once. They blamed her, said she bound the death spirit into the child. And then, Lada prompted, they buried her alive beneath the temple. Her voice broke into a rasp, but they forgot to burn her scarf, and they never buried her bell. Lada blinked. Her bell? The old woman turned her head, eyes milky but locked onto her. The midwife's bell must be buried in silence. If it rings above ground, her chant returns, and she does not come gently. The words lodged in Lada's throat. She wanted to ask more. When, how, who? But Yai Lam Yai had closed her eyes. Her lips began to move. No sound came out, just rhythm. That same slow, haunting pulse, like a heartbeat remembered from the womb. That night, Lada didn't dream. Instead, she felt something, as if her body had been filled with warm water, and something inside it stirred, not her heartbeat, but something slower, heavier, like breath underwater. She woke gasping, hand on her stomach. A mark had formed on her skin, small, circular, almost like a bruise, but shaped like fingers, infant fingers. She stumbled to the mirror. Her eyes were bloodshot, her lips pale. She tried to speak, but her voice cracked, and for a moment it wasn't her voice that came out. It was a hum, low, crooning, a lullaby she did not know. When she turned on her recorder, the device clicked once and then played something by itself. A woman's voice, breathless, weak, whispering, "Where is my child?" Lada dropped the recorder. The bell was real. Lada didn't know how she knew, but the moment she opened her eyes the next morning, drenched in sweat and dread, she felt it. Somewhere in that ruined temple, buried beneath rotted stone and forgotten soil, the bell of Mae Maud waited, and it had started ringing again. She held her recorder close, replaying the audio from last night. The woman's voice, "Where is my child?" was no longer there. Instead, there was only the echo of a bell, one single chime stretched unnaturally long, metallic, hollow, grieving. She hadn't captured it herself. The device had recorded it without her touching it. This wasn't data anymore. It was communion. Lada stared at her reflection in the dusty mirror by the window. Her skin looked paler. There were faint red marks on her neck, not scratches, but lines, thin, symmetrical, and forming a loose spiral down toward her collarbone, like a scarf being drawn tight. She whispered, "Mae Maud," and for a moment, she thought the mirror fogged from the inside. She returned to the temple before noon. The air along the path had changed. The forest no longer simply felt silent. It felt listening. Each step she took sounded muffled, as if the earth itself didn't want to echo her movement. When she reached Wat Mod Noi, she did not hesitate. She stepped past the stone lions, over the collapsed steps, and into the open mouth of the temple. She went straight for the stairway in the far corner, the collapsed hole that led into darkness. Today, she came prepared. She carried a flashlight, rope, gloves, and a bundle of incense Auntie Simorn had silently handed her that morning. "If you find the bell, burn this before you touch it," the old woman said. Lada didn't ask why. She tied the rope around a secure beam and lowered herself into the stairwell. The descent was cold, steep, and narrow, the walls pressed in with damp breath. The stone was slick beneath her gloves. After 12 steps, her feet touched ground. Her flashlight flickered once, then steadied. The chamber was small, no larger than a monk's cell, but filled with shapes. Clay urns, dozens of them, lined the walls. Each one had been wrapped in red cloth. Some had fallen and shattered, revealing small bundles of hair, bone, or dried lotus leaves. Lada's chest clenched. This was not a crypt, it was a womb. In the center of the chamber sat a platform. Upon it, barely visible beneath a layer of soot and time, was a bronze bell the size of a melon. It was cracked. Not broken, just cracked diagonally, like a wound that never closed. Her feet moved forward without thought. Her flashlight dimmed as she stepped closer. The bell was wrapped in red silk, brittle with age, but still vibrant beneath the dust. She saw faint stains along the fabric, brown-black, like dried blood. A symbol had been painted on the silk, a spiral crossed by a diagonal slash. She recognized it from the murals. Her hand hovered over the bell. Then she remembered the incense. In shaking fingers, she placed the bundle at the edge of the platform and lit it. The scent filled the air, sharp, bitter, tinged with myrrh and something iron-sweet. The smoke curled toward the ceiling, then flattened, hovering like it had hit glass. Then the bell rang. Not from her touch, not from the wind. It rang from within. Lada froze. The air turned heavier, pressing on her chest. She dropped to her knees as a sound, a woman's chant, filled the chamber. It wasn't in Thai, not modern Thai at least, but Lada understood its meaning, not the words, but the weight. It was a ritual, a lullaby and a command, a call to stay. Stay in the womb, stay in the silence, stay in the dark where breath and blood still flow. The chant grew louder. Lada's hand trembled toward the bell. Her fingertips grazed the fabric, and her vision snapped. She saw a room, candlelit. A woman kneeled over a screaming mother. Her hands were coated in blood. She held a bell in one hand, a scarf in the other. She rang the bell once. The room grew silent. The baby did not cry, but the mother did. And the bell rang again. This time, the baby opened its mouth and breathed in. Lada collapsed backward, choking. The vision vanished. She crawled away from the bell. The chanting stopped. The incense smoke vanished. She turned and ran up the stairs, bursting into the sunlight, gasping as if she'd been held underwater. That night, Lada did not sleep. She sat on the floor of Auntie Simorne's kitchen, staring at her recorder. The bell's echo was still there. A new chant had appeared, barely audible beneath it. A second voice, younger, higher, like a child learning a song, a child mimicking the ritual. Auntie Simorne entered silently, carrying a bundle wrapped in red cloth. Lada stared. "What is that?" The old woman sat and unwrapped it. Inside was another bell. It was smaller, handheld, made of bone, not metal. They used to give this to the mothers so they could ring it when labor began. It meant the midwife should prepare the chant. Lada touched it. It felt warm. The bell wasn't just a signal. It was a boundary. Once it rang, the womb became sacred. What entered might not be human. Lada's chest tightened. Did Maymad do this willingly? Simorne hesitated. She believed she was protecting the unborn. She thought she was saving them from the noise of the world. And what went wrong? Simorn's eyes grew distant. She tried to bring one back. Lada said nothing. Simorn lowered her voice to a trembling hush. The mother had died. The baby had not cried. The family begged her. They buried the placenta, wrapped the scarf, lit the incense. Mae Maud chanted for 7 days. On the 7th night, the baby screamed. Lada felt her heart drop. It survived? Simorn nodded, but it never stopped screaming. She looked up, until Mae Maud took it back. That night, Lada dreamed again. This time, she stood inside the temple, but she was not herself. She wore white. Her hands were red. The bell was in her palm. She looked down at a woman on the floor, dead-eyed and still. A baby lay beside her, silent, cold, and Lada began to chant, not to mourn, to summon. It started with the dreams, then it moved into her body. Lada had always felt comfortable in her own skin, logical, grounded, ruled by reason. But now something shifted, like the shape of herself was being shared, not taken, not possessed, just quietly occupied. The voice came more often now, not in the air, not in her ears, but from within. Like someone humming underwater, just beneath her ribs. It only spoke when her heartbeat slowed, when her body became still. In the seconds between waking and sleep, it would hum softly, and then whisper, "You carry what should not return." Lada stood in front of her mirror again. She hadn't eaten in 2 days. Her hands shook, and her skin looked translucent under the light. The mark on her stomach had changed. It was no longer just bruising. It had grown. 5 small indentations, now fully formed, curved upward like grasping fingers, and inside each, a darker center, like tiny buds waiting to bloom. The skin was hot to the touch. She pressed her fingers to them. Her stomach twitched. From inside, she felt a flutter. Not gas, not muscle spasm. Something ancient in her DNA recognized it. It was a kick. Lada screamed. Auntie Simorn found her curled on the mat, shaking. The old woman said nothing at first. She only placed a cold towel on Lada's forehead, then lit incense and circled it slowly, chanting under her breath. When Lada could speak again, her voice was dry and cracked. "There's something inside me." Simorn didn't deny it. Instead, she reached into a woven basket and pulled out a thin parchment, yellowed, crumbling, tied with twine. She unwrapped it carefully. It was a birth chart, not astrological, not medical. It showed a womb in red ink, surrounded by symbols, some Buddhist, some animist, some Lada didn't recognize at all. Around the image were diagrams of bells, different sizes, different sounds, each with an annotation. "The midwives of the old world," Simorn said softly, "used sound to protect the mother, to tell the spirits which womb was closed and which one was open." She pointed to one symbol, a bell with a vertical crack, the same as the bell Lada had seen in the temple. "This one," she whispered, "should never ring again. It is the bell of return." Lada stared at it. "The scar on my body? It's from that?" "No." Simorn looked at her. "It's not a scar. It's a cradle." That night, Lada locked herself in her room. She turned on her recorder and spoke, voice trembling. "Audio log day 6. I believe I have become the vessel for something I do not understand. I don't know if it's a spirit, a memory, a curse, but it is inside me, and I fear it was placed there intentionally." She paused. The lullaby has changed. It's no longer distant. It feels like it's being sung into my blood, like my own voice is learning it. She stopped the recording. Then, as she turned to set the device down, her body moved without her. She opened her mouth and began to hum. The sound was low, gentle, haunting, a lullaby that did not exist in any modern dialect. The rhythm was too slow, too sorrowful, as if every note was weighted with grief, and in the center of that hum was breath, not hers. Something exhaled through her vocal cords. Lada backed into the wall, hand clutching her throat. The humming stopped, but her body felt looser. Her heartbeat was not alone. There was another rhythm now, slower, thicker, like a drumbeat buried in the soil. She collapsed, and in the final flicker of consciousness, she heard the voice again, only this time it wasn't asking where the child was. It was whispering, "It's almost time." Morning came in pieces. Lada awoke to light cutting through slats in the wall. Her skin burned with fever. Her bones felt hollow. She moved like she'd been underwater for hours. Simorn entered silently. She did not ask questions. She only sat beside her and placed a bowl of cool herbs in her lap. "You must understand," she finally said. "This is not a possession." Lada looked up, eyes wide. Simorn's expression was solemn. "This is a conception, but of memory, not of flesh." Lada shook her head. "I'm not pregnant." "No," Simorn agreed, "but you are remembering a pregnancy that never ended." The words didn't make sense, but her body knew they were true. "She's using you to finish what was denied to her, to bring the chant full circle. The final lullaby was never completed. That's why she cannot rest. That's why she chose you." "Why me?" Lada choked. "Because you listen, and you record. She needed a vessel who preserves, and she needed someone who did not belong to this village. The soil here remembers, but the city forgets." Lada pressed her hands to her face. "She's trying to be born again." Simorn nodded. "But she will not come as a child, not anymore." That night, the marks on Lada's stomach began to ache. She curled in pain, not from cramps, not from illness, but from movement. Something inside her shifted, not alive, not dead, just present. She fell into a deep trance, not quite sleep, not quite waking. She saw herself standing in front of the temple. Beneath the earth, hundreds of urns pulsed with red light. From each, a thread of red cloth unraveled upward, all converging into her chest. At the center of the courtyard, the cracked bell sat. It rang once, and every urn opened. From them rose not infants, but echoes, cries without mouths, hands without bodies, spirits shaped by lullabies. They hovered around her, and then merged into her. Lada woke with a scream, but no sound came out, only the lullaby. It now sang through her, not from her throat, but from her womb. Lada no longer felt like one person. Each day, something within her stretched a little further, a memory not her own, a heartbeat that beat out of rhythm with her own. She did not know if she was haunted, inhabited, or unraveling, but she did know this: she was becoming someone else, and that someone had never been allowed to finish what she began. The villagers stopped looking at her. When she passed by, heads turned, conversations ended, children were pulled inside.
Even Auntie Simorn had grown quiet, watching her with a mix of pity and fear, like someone watching a thunderstorm forming behind a familiar face. On the 7th day, a stranger arrived. She was a woman in her 40s, dressed in faded temple robes, her face tanned and sharp, her eyes dark with recognition. She said nothing when she entered Simorn's home. She only looked at Lada and knelt. "You carry her," she said. Lada didn't speak. "I was meant to," the woman whispered, "but I ran." Her name was Sao Nuan. She had once lived in the village, but on the day she turned 23, the age of ripening, as the elders called it, she was chosen by the spirits to perform the ritual of the carrier. 7 days, 7 nights, silent. No food, no mirror, no sleep. The ritual was never explained, only endured. "She enters the body gently," Sao said, "like breath, like a lullaby." "And what happens after?" Lada asked. Sao looked away. "If the chant is completed," she said, "she leaves, quietly. She is reborn in silence. The temple bells stop ringing. The scar fades. The line ends. And if it isn't?" Sao didn't answer, but her eyes filled with guilt. "I fled on the 6th night. I couldn't take the dreams. I couldn't tell if I was waking or still chanting. And something touched me in my sleep, something not yet born." She paused. Her hands trembled. "I bled for 3 days, and then the temple bell cracked." Lada felt it then, the bell's echo inside her, faint but pulsing, like a toothache in her bones. "She's unfinished," Sao whispered. "That's the danger. Not that she returns, but that she returns half-formed." Simorn prepared a basin of water infused with herbs and ash. She handed Lada a strip of red cloth and a bowl of raw rice. "If you want to survive the ritual," the old woman said, "you must do it willingly. That is the first law." Lada's voice was hoarse. "What happens if I don't?" Simorn looked down at the bowl. "Then she completes herself through your body, and you won't come back." That night, Lada sat alone in the temple ruins. The villagers had left offerings around the perimeter, candles, broken bells, pieces of silk, and stillborn toys carved from wood, all signs of fear disguised as reverence. The moon was high. The stairway into the earth yawned before her. She lit a stick of incense, laid the red scarf across her lap, and began to chant. Not from memory, from somewhere deeper. The words flowed from her mouth as if they had always lived there, trapped between molars and breath. The melody was ancient, hollow, woven with grief. With every line she sang, her body grew heavier. Her hands trembled, her eyes burned, her stomach ached, the marks on her skin turned black, and in the echo of her own voice, she heard herself answer back, not as Lada, but as Mae Maud. The memory hit her like heat. She saw herself kneeling beside a dying woman, the room filled with incense and panic, a stillborn child in her arms, the family screaming. She rang the bell, once, twice. The 3rd time, the child opened its eyes, but they were not human. They were old, watching. And in that moment, the mother exhaled her final breath. The chant had tethered a spirit, but not the infant's. Something had entered the baby, something pulled by the bell, something ancient and unclean. Mae Maud tried to undo it. She chanted for 3 more days, but it was too late. The child lived, but it did not sleep. It screamed through the night. It drank no milk. It stared through walls. And then it vanished. Mae Maud was blamed, beaten, dragged to Wat Mod Noi, and buried alive.
still chanting as the soil filled her mouth. Lada came back to herself, screaming. The scarf was wrapped around her throat. She tore it off. Her stomach twisted with agony, the handprints burned, her mouth filled with milk and ashes. She crawled to the temple steps and vomited something thick and white. It sizzled in the dirt like acid. When she turned back toward the temple, she saw her shadow standing without her, and in its arms was a child, wrapped in red. Sao Nuan was gone by morning. She had left a note. She knows you now, and she knows you're willing. Finish what I couldn't, or she will finish it through you. The lullaby had changed again. Now it echoed not just in Lada's dreams, but in the walls, in water, in bird song. Even the wind hummed with its rhythm, and everyone in the village began waking with blood on their palms, as if they had tried to hold something or someone. Lada no longer dreamed in fragments. She dreamed in ritual. The sequences unfolded in order, like steps to a dance she hadn't learned but somehow already knew. Each night, the chant came more clearly. Each night, the woman she became in those dreams, Mae Maud, felt less like a separate presence and more like the truth beneath her skin. This wasn't possession. This was becoming. On the 8th night, Lada walked back to Wat Mod Noi under a moon as pale as bone. Her legs carried her without thought. She had stopped resisting, not because she was weak, but because she knew the chant would never end until someone completed it, and she had already begun. The temple ruins were waiting, not silent, not anymore. The wind moved like breath through the trees. Leaves whispered like paper charms. The broken stones glowed faintly under moonlight, and the cracked bell at the center seemed to lean toward her, as though listening. She descended the stairs again. This time, she did not light the incense. This time, she brought rice water, a coil of red thread, and a clay urn she had taken from Simorn's shelf. The chamber below had changed. The urns that once lined the walls now sat in a circle, as if something had moved them. In the center, on a mat of woven reeds, lay a bundle wrapped in red silk. It was the size of a newborn. Her hands shook, but she stepped forward. The bundle didn't move, but the air around it pulsed, thick, humid, smelling faintly of milk and rot. She knelt beside it and placed the clay urn down gently. Then she sang. The chant rose from her belly, not her throat. It came in waves, rising, falling, rippling like water stirred by something beneath. She could feel the rhythm in her spine, in her teeth, in the space between her ribs. The chamber responded. The urns vibrated. A faint hum filled the stone. The bell cracked louder, the fissure deepening. As she sang, her vision shifted. No longer in the temple. She stood beneath a blood-red canopy in a house made of bamboo and silence. A mother screamed in the corner, her face veiled. Mae Maud knelt at her feet, chanting. The baby was halfway born. Still, lifeless. Mae Maud placed a bell on the mother's chest. Then began the second verse, the forbidden verse, the one meant only for the spirit's ear. As she chanted, a black shadow rose from the corner of the room, a twisted, silent thing, shaped like a child, but moving wrong, too long in the limbs, its eyes hollow. It drifted toward the infant, and Mae Maud welcomed it. She offered the red scarf, she offered the bell, she let it enter. Because to Mae Maud, silence was worse than death. To lose a child was to lose a voice that had never spoken. She would not allow it again. Lada jolted back into her body. The bundle on the mat twitched. It breathed. Not deeply, but enough. She backed away, heart pounding. The scarf unraveled slowly, inch by inch, revealing a grayish shape inside, not fully formed, not quite solid, like a child made of smoke and sorrow. It opened its mouth and sang her lullaby back to her. She ran from the chamber, up the stairs, into the forest. Her legs burned, her lungs screamed. The trees blurred past her, but the singing followed, no longer in her head, no longer behind her, but all around. The world was humming the ritual. She collapsed just outside Auntie Simorn's home. The old woman dragged her inside, wrapped her in wet cloths, and whispered a prayer Lada didn't understand. Her body convulsed, her mouth opened, but no words came, only the rhythm. The beat of the chant throbbed in her jaw, her spine, her womb. When it passed, she was drenched in blood and sweat. Simorn stared at her with wide eyes. "What did you do?" I sang the second verse." Simorn dropped her gaze. "Then it has already begun." The next day, the villagers began digging in silence. No one spoke, no one explained. Lada watched from the porch as old men and children alike carried offerings to the edge of the forest, rice stalls, broken teeth, shards of mirrors. They placed them on the ground, facing the direction of the temple. "Why are they doing that?" she asked. Simorn's voice was distant. "They're welcoming the rebirth." "I thought they feared her." "They do, but they also know if the chant remains unfinished, she'll come back angry. This time, she'll come for everyone's children." That evening, Lada sat with the urn in her hands. She could feel something shifting inside it. Not movement, not heat, memory. The clay vibrated gently. Faint traces of weeping rose from inside, not loud, not human, as though the urn itself remembered the sorrow it once held. Lada whispered to it, "What are you?" And something inside whispered back, "The lullaby without a cradle." That night, her body changed. Her skin flushed with heat. Her belly tightened, muscles flexing as if bracing for pain. She fell to the floor, gripping herself, unable to scream. And in the moment she thought she would tear in half, she laughed. But it wasn't her voice. It was Mae Maud. Soft, pained, triumphant. "It is time." The bell should have been buried. That was the truth the villagers never spoke aloud, the secret that tied all of their warnings into silence. Mae Maud had not cursed the village out of malice. She had been tethered to this world because the chant was interrupted, and the bell was left behind. The bell was the key. It rang for every soul that hadn't passed cleanly, for every child whose first breath was taken with borrowed air, for every lullaby that was sung in mourning instead of joy. And now it rang inside Lada. She sat beneath the tamarind tree outside Simorn's home, rocking slightly,
her hands clasped around the bone bell Sao Nuan had left behind. Her fingers trembled with each pass of the wind, not because she was cold, but because the sound was back, that soft, thin humming at the edge of her hearing, like someone crooning through water, just under the skin of the world. It was louder now. It followed her into every room, into every moment. Even silence had a rhythm. Simorn emerged, carrying a bowl of salt and crushed leaves. "You must bury the bell before the next moonrise, and it must be done with your hands, alone. No prayers, no fire, just earth." Lada looked up. "And then it will end?" Simorn's gaze dropped. "No, but it will choose. If the bell sleeps, she may rest. If not—" She didn't finish the sentence. Lada returned to Wat Mod Noi at dusk. The temple was quieter now, as if listening. The shadows stretched longer than they should. The Buddha statue's bowed head looked heavier, as though it mourned what it could not stop. She stepped inside the sanctuary. The cracked bell remained where it had always been, resting at the center of the floor like a wound that never healed. The mural on the far wall, once faded, had grown darker. The red scarf in the painting now looked fresh, as if newly soaked in blood. Lada knelt beside the bell and unwrapped the silk from around the bone bell she carried. For a moment, the two bells faced each other, one forged in fire, one carved from death. She dug. Her hands tore through earth and ash, through layers of soot, through bone fragments and clay dust. Her fingernails split. Her wrists ached. Still, she dug, until the hole was deep enough to fit the bell and something more. She placed it inside. The moment she did, the ground sang, a vibration, a single note, deep and sorrowful. It hummed up her arms, into her chest. Her teeth chattered from the inside. Her womb clenched, not in pain, but in recognition. She was part of the ritual now, not a witness, not even a vessel, a verse. She covered the bell with soil, pressed her bleeding palms flat over the mound, whispered the only line she knew was hers. Let her sleep, but not in silence. The wind died. Everything stopped, even the insects. Lada remained frozen, and then the silence was broken, not by a cry, but by singing. It came from beneath the temple, a lullaby rising from the buried bell, no longer distorted, no longer mournful. It was complete, a soft, aching melody sung by a voice that once chanted through dirt and blood. My Maud was singing not to the dead, but to herself. It was the song she had never finished, and now through Lada it had found its end. The villagers felt it too. That night the candles they placed on their doorsteps flickered, but did not go out. Children who for weeks had cried in their sleep slept peacefully for the first time. Mothers awoke without nightmares. The forest fell still. The dogs did not bark. The bell had stopped ringing, but the melody lingered. It clung to the air like the memory of breath. Lada stayed in the temple until dawn. Her body was weak, but her mind was clear. She felt something in her spine uncoil, a tension that had lived there for generations, passed from one forgotten womb to another. When she walked back to the village, the sky was pale with morning, and Auntie Simorn was waiting with a basin of clean water and a silence that felt grateful. But Lada knew better. This wasn't over. My Maud had not returned for vengeance.
She had returned for completion. And now that the chant had ended, what would be born from it? Later that day, Lada returned to her recorder. Her voice was quiet but steady. Audio log, day 9. The bell has been buried. The ritual was performed in silence and in solitude. The second verse of the chant completed itself through me. I believe I was the vessel for her voice, not her spirit, her memory. She paused. But something changed. Her hand went to her stomach. There is no longer a mark, but I still feel full. Not with life, not with death, with song, as though something unfinished inside me has become part of something older, something echoing. Another pause. My Maud isn't gone. She was never supposed to leave. She's not a ghost. She's a threshold, a voice carried forward through every woman who ever feared silence more than pain. Outside, the wind stirred the trees, and from the distance came a single, final chime, faint, fragile, like a baby's breath against a bell. Then silence. Not absence, rest. The bell had been buried. The chant had ended, but the scarf remained, and it was not done. Lada first saw it again 2 nights later, curled neatly at the edge of her mat, as if someone had placed it there while she slept. Red, frayed at the ends, still damp. She reached for it slowly, her hands trembling. The fabric was warm, too warm. It pulsed faintly between her fingers, not like a heartbeat, like breath. She wanted to believe it was just a remnant, a final echo. But as she lifted it to the light, she saw what lay woven between the strands. Hair, fine, black, threaded into the weave, wrapped and tangled as though the scarf had been made not just to bind, but to remember. She returned to Wat Mod Noi the next day, alone. The temple was still, but not dead. There was a tension in the air, like a held breath. The mural on the wall had changed again. She could feel it before she turned to look. And when she did, her blood ran cold. The woman in white, the midwife, no longer knelt alone. She stood now, holding a child. But the child's face was blank, as if the paint refused to remember, as if the soul it depicted had never truly taken form. Below them, painted in faded red, was the scarf, torn in half. Lada didn't understand at first. She thought the ritual had ended, the chant had been sung, the bell had been buried. But Samorn confirmed the truth with eyes filled with fear. You buried the bell, but you did not bury the scar. Lada blinked. What do you mean? The scarf is the thread between worlds. It binds mother to child, life to spirit. If it still exists, then so does the possibility. Samorn placed her hand over Lada's heart. She isn't inside you anymore, but she's around you, waiting. Lada examined the scarf that night, closer, carefully. She turned it over and saw something stitched into the seam, thread that had faded to a grayish color, almost invisible in the dim light. It was a name, not written in Thai, not in any script she recognized, but the moment her eyes met the stitching, she understood what it meant. It was Mae Maud's child, the one who had been born, yet not fully. The one whose body had lived, but whose soul had been left behind. The one who screamed instead of sleeping. The unclaimed spirit. And suddenly, Lada understood what the scarf was. It was the tether, the bridge, the final gate. And it was broken. Half of it had been buried with Mae Maud. The other half was here, in Lada's hands. She tried to burn it. She took it outside, doused it with kerosene, and lit a match. But the flame wouldn't catch. The fabric refused the fire. Smoke rose, yes, but it smelled not of burning, but of milk, of salt, of infant breath. The flame hissed out. She dropped it in the dirt and backed away, her chest pounding. And then, from behind her, a whisper. "You promised." She turned. No one there, but the scarf was gone. That night the dreams returned, vibrant, loud, thick with breath and song. She stood in the temple again, but this time the chamber below was full. Every urn cracked open, red threads stretched from wall to wall like a spider's web. At the center was the scarf, floating in the air, whole, untorn, and beneath it, a child. But not a baby, a girl. Eyes wide, face blank, skin cracked like old clay. She reached for Lada with hands too long for her age, mouth opening slowly. No voice, only a choking sound, like someone trying to sing with a throat full of water. Lada stepped forward. The girl pointed downward to the earth beneath the temple, to where the other half of the scarf was buried. And Lada understood. Mae Maud's chant had tethered the child's soul. The bell had preserved the ritual, but the scarf, torn, broken, had left both spirits incomplete. One buried, one wandering, both still singing. There was only one thing left to do. She would reunite the halves. That night Lada descended to the temple one last time. The air was thicker now, heavy with incense that no one had lit. The clay urns were cracked open, threads of red silk spilled across the floor like veins. She dug into the ground where she had buried the bell. The earth moved easily this time, soft as breath. And when her fingers touched the buried half of the scarf, she didn't pull it free. She pressed her half into the soil beside it, knotted them together, and whispered, "Let her become." The ground shuddered. The scarf pulsed once, and then dissolved into the earth like blood into water. The lullaby returned, soft, final, full. And in the stillness that followed, Lada heard a baby cry. But this time, it wasn't a scream. It was alive, whole, born of chant, of silence, of ritual completed. And somewhere in the wind, Mae Maud exhaled. The first night felt like déjà vu. Lada awoke sitting upright, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes fixed on the dark corner of the room. She had no memory of sitting up, no memory of waking. Yet she was already there, as if something had risen before her and she had simply followed. The scarf was gone. The bell was gone. But she was not alone. Something was living in the rhythm of her breath. Not a ghost, not Mae Maud, but a memory she now shared, a life she had never lived, beginning to unfold through her, one night at a time. Night 1. She dreamed of blood and steam, of hands gripping bone, of voices chanting in the dark, not out of fear, but devotion. She knelt before a mother in labor, her own mouth moving in a chant she could not understand, but somehow remembered. The bell rang once, twice, then silence. The baby was still. She placed the scarf, began the second verse. The child screamed. Night 2. Lada walked the temple grounds barefoot. But the temple was no ruin. It was whole, painted in gold and red, freshly swept, full of flowers. Women waited outside in silence, their faces pale. Inside, a line of urns lay ready, each with a name painted on its clay surface. She opened one, found a lock of hair and a tooth inside. She wept, but it wasn't her grief. By the third night, she stopped sleeping. The dreams came anyway. Waking or dreaming made no difference. Maymad was no longer a visitor. She was inhabiting, sliding gently into her limbs, whispering through her bones, not controlling, but remembering through her. Night 3. She stood before a council of monks. They accused her of speaking to the dead, of crossing the sacred line between life and rebirth. Maymad did not deny it. She only smiled and said, "The spirit does not die if the mother remembers." During the day, Lada could barely eat. She sat under trees and listened to the wind for hours, convinced it carried chants that no one else could hear. Samorn watched her from a distance, not with pity, with recognition. "You've begun the cycle. You are walking her nights." Lada asked, "How many are there?" Samorn's answer was simple. 7. Night 4. Lada floated above herself, watching as Maymad buried another urn. But this time, the child inside had not died. It had been taken, stolen from its cradle in the night. Maymad followed the trail into the woods and found the infant in a hollow tree, its mouth stuffed with rice, its body surrounded by red ants. She did not scream. She lifted the baby gently, then began a different chant, one meant to seal pain into the soil. She sang it as she buried the child. The ants followed her all the way home. On the 5th night, Lada began to speak in her sleep. Samorn recorded it. She chanted in an old dialect, Isan mixed with fragments of Pali and spirit tongue. When translated, the words meant, "Do not open the cradle until the song has ended." Night 5. The temple was burning. Villagers surrounded it with torches and ropes. Maymad stood inside, cradling her bell and her scarf like twin children. They demanded she stop chanting. She refused. They dragged her to the stone floor, and she began the final verse, even as they beat her, even as they dug the pit, even as they lowered her in. On the 6th night, Lada bled, not heavily, just enough to remind her that her body was part of this now. She lay still and did not panic. The blood was warm, ancient, like something inside her had shed a name. On the 6th night, Maymad lay in the earth, face up, the red scarf clenched between her teeth. The bell lay on her chest. The final verse hummed through her skull. She could not speak, but she could vibrate. She vibrated her grief into the dirt. She let the worms take her voice. She became part of the soil, not cursed, not punished, but preserved. The seventh night came with thunder. Lada stood in the center of the temple, rain pouring through the broken roof. Her skin glowed faintly, the chant living in her like a heartbeat. The temple was empty now. No bells, no murals, no urns. Just the sound of breathing. Not hers, but someone new. The seventh night came with thunder. Maud opened her eyes from the pit, but the world had changed. No one remembered the chants. No one buried the bells. No one wrapped the scarves. The women birthed in hospitals. The midwives had become machines. And she was no longer needed. She screamed, but her dirt muffled her. And so she waited for someone to dig her memory back into light. Lada awoke screaming. Her hands were muddy, her fingers bloody, her pillow soaked. But her voice was hers again. The 7 nights were complete. Maud was gone. But in her place, something had been left behind. Not a spirit, not a ghost, a knowing. Lada stood before the temple one last time, and for the first time it was truly silent. No chant, no echo, no wind, just stillness. A breath finally held, and beneath her ribs, the rhythm of the lullaby was gone. By the 8th morning, the lullaby had faded, but something heavier remained. Lada carried no voice inside her now, no hum in her blood, no spectral breath at the edge of sleep. But there was an absence, a weight, like someone had left behind a cradle, and the child never came. She wandered the edge of the forest that day, drawn to the fig tree with 3 trunks. It was the oldest tree in the region, older than the temple ruins, older than any villager still alive. It had long been used for offerings. Tiny cloth dolls pinned with red string, clumps of soil wrapped in banana leaves, rusted bells tied to branches like forgotten wind chimes. But today, something else hung from it. A bundle of cloth. Lada stepped closer. It was a swaddling wrap, faded white, stained in patches, carefully tied and tucked. Inside, no baby, only ashes. Cold, light, as if they'd been waiting decades to be found. Samorn met her on the path back to the village. Lada did not speak. She simply held up the cloth. Samorn's face did not change. Only her voice did, softer, cracked. You found her. Her? Samorn nodded. The one Maud carried. She was pregnant? Samorn lowered her eyes. The story told is that she tethered others' children, but that's only half. The truth is she tried to bring back her own. It was not just ritual. It was not just belief. Maud's final chant had been personal. Her child had died in the womb. No sound, no cry. And Maud, midwife of the spirits, could not accept it. She did what no midwife had done before. She turned the ritual on herself. She wrapped her own placenta. She tied the red scarf around her own belly. She chanted into her own breath, and she called her child back. But something went wrong, Lada whispered. Samorn nodded. Because the chant was incomplete. She tried to finish it as they buried her, but she was too deep. The bell cracked, the scarf tore, and the child split, Lada finished. Half above, half below. A soul caught between birth and burial. The infant never found a body, so it lingered. The haunting had never been about Mae Mode. It had always been about the child. The screams, the lullabies, the handprints, all from a soul that had never been fully born. A soul that knew only its mother's grief, her chants, her broken promises. A spirit made of incomplete intention. Lada felt the air shift around her. A realization settled like dust. She hadn't been the vessel of Mae Mode. She had been the cradle of the forgotten child. That night, she placed the ash-filled cloth bundle on the altar in Samorn's home. She surrounded it with offerings, milk, lotus petals, jasmine water, a new scarf dyed deep red, a handmade rattle carved from tamarind wood. And then she sang. Not the chant, not the lullaby, but a new song. Simple, soft, invented in the moment, spoken without fear. Not to summon, not to bind, but to release. She sang not to the spirit, but to the possibility of peace. And the room filled with a warmth that did not come from candles. The air shifted, the bundle grew lighter, and in the center of the offering bowl, the ashes were gone. The child had left. Not dragged, not sealed, not exorcised, but guided. Lada wept. For Mae Mode, for the child, and for every memory that had waited generations to be remembered just long enough to finally sleep. At dawn, she returned to the temple one last time. The cracked bell was gone. The murals faded. The urns, dust. But on the stone floor where Mae Mode had once chanted, there lay a single thread of red silk, no longer stained, just a thread, unbroken, untied, free. The village held no records of the ceremony of red water. No names, no dates, no chants written down. It wasn't the kind of ritual meant to be remembered. It was meant to be felt, once, by the one chosen, and then never spoken of again. Lada woke before dawn, her body restless, her skin flushed with a strange warmth. The air outside was still, but she could feel the village was already awake. Not loud, not bustling, but waiting. She stepped out and found Samorn already at the threshold, holding a folded bundle of white cotton and a bowl filled with dark, rust-colored water. The bowl trembled slightly in her hands. "Is this blood?" Lada whispered. Samorn shook her head. Not anymore. They walked together in silence, past homes with windows shuttered tight, past fields that refused to stir. Even the animals remained quiet, as though the entire village knew this was not a day for sound. They arrived at the edge of the forest where the three-trunked fig tree stood. There, arranged in a perfect circle around its roots, were 7 women, all elders, faces drawn, eyes steady. Each held a bowl. Each bowl contained water that shimmered red in the morning light. Lada instinctively knew these were the keepers of the memory, the last witnesses of the cradle ritual, the ceremony of red water. A rite not of exorcism, not of cleansing, but of acceptance. Samorn motioned for Lada to remove her outer garments. The white cotton robe was handed to her in silence. She slipped it on, the fabric whispering across her skin like breath. It smelled faintly of ash, jasmine, and rain. The women stepped forward, forming a circle around her. No words were exchanged, only rhythm. One by one, they stepped forward and poured their bowls of red water over Lada's head. It wasn't warm, not cold, only heavy. The water clung to her skin like memory. It dripped down her face, over her shoulders, along her spine. It pooled at her feet, staining the earth a deep rust. And with each bowl emptied, Lada felt pieces of herself lifting. Grief, fear, possession, the residue of chant sung through someone else's mouth. Each drop pulled a thread loose. Each wash returned something to silence. When the last bowl was poured, Simorn approached with the final offering. It was a strip of red silk, clean, unmarked. She tied it gently around Lada's wrist and then whispered the only words spoken aloud. "Now, you are the last." Lada knelt, and in that stillness, something inside her released. Not a scream, not a sob, but a sigh, deep and long, pulled from the lowest part of her lungs, as if the breath had been trapped there for generations. The soil beneath her absorbed it. The fig tree creaked above, and the sun finally broke over the treetops, casting golden light over the red-stained ground. The ceremony was done, not to bind, but to close. Later, alone, Lada washed her hands in the river. The red had faded from her skin, but the scent remained, iron-rich and bittersweet, like old lullabies carried through rusted bells. She didn't wipe it away. She let it linger. She had become more than a researcher now, more than a vessel. She was the memory keeper, the last woman to walk the path that Maya Maud had carved in silence, and perhaps the only one to walk it all the way to its end. That evening, the villagers gathered by the edge of the forest, not to speak, not to sing, but simply to stand, to listen, to feel what it meant, for the first time in decades, to have no chant echoing through the trees, no bells, no cries, only peace. Simorn stood beside Lada and took her hand. "You gave her what no one else could. You gave her a place to finish," she whispered. Lada nodded, but she did not reply. Because in her bones she knew the ritual had never been about ending Maya Maud's story. It had been about letting her complete it. And in doing so, Lada had become part of something older than grief, older than death, a thread in a tapestry woven from lullabies and blood. And now, the weave was whole. The bell had been buried, the scarf reunited, the ashes released. The child remembered, the mother mourned. But one sound remained unsung, the final ring. Lada didn't understand it at first. She thought the ceremony of red water was the end, that she had closed the wound, sealed the chant, brought rest to the dead. But peace, she would learn, is not silence. Peace is completion, and something still waited to be heard. It came to her in the smallest way. A breeze, heavy with the scent of tamarind and smoke, carried a sound she hadn't heard in days. Not a lullaby, not a cry. A click, metal on wood, the unmistakable voice of a bell.
not ringing, but waiting. She found it near the banyan roots beside the temple wall. A child's bell. Small, brass, slightly dented, the handle wrapped in faded thread. She picked it up with care. It was cold, but not lifeless. It pulsed faintly in her palm, like it had been holding its breath for decades, as if it knew its time had come. She returned to the heart of Wat Mod Noi one final time. This time, no wind resisted her, no voices followed her, no shadows clung to her feet, just the sound of her own breath and the weight of the bell. The sanctuary stood quiet, sunlight pouring through the collapsed ceiling like a blessing. The murals had faded completely now, worn smooth by time. Only a faint outline remained of a woman in white, her hands empty, her eyes closed, waiting, not to speak, but to be heard. Lada walked to the center of the floor, where once the urns had stood, where the chanting had echoed, where memory had returned to breath. She held the bell to her chest and closed her eyes, then whispered, "This is not a calling. This is a farewell." And she rang it. The sound was not loud. It did not shatter the air or shake the walls. It was soft, clean, precise. A single note, but it carried everything. The voices of mothers long gone, the cries of infants never held, the breath of midwives buried in silence, the grief of those who were never named. It rang once, and in that moment, the temple breathed. Stone relaxed, air warmed, the earth shifted. The wind returned, not as a howl, but as a sigh, a release, a letting go. Somewhere in the distance, dogs barked, children laughed. The world did not end, but something ancient concluded. Lada knelt and placed the bell on the ground. She didn't bury it, she didn't burn it. She left it there, on the bare stone, exposed to light. Because some sounds are not meant to be hidden. They are meant to echo, not forever, just long enough for someone to hear them and understand. That night, the villagers lit candles along the paths, not out of fear, but in remembrance, an offering of light not to a spirit, but to a story. Simorn stood beside Lada, her face lined with years, her voice soft. "It's over now," she said. Lada nodded. "For her." Simorn looked at her carefully. "And for you?" Lada took a long breath. "No," she said. "But I carry it differently now. Not as a weight, as a thread. One she would not let fray again." As the villagers sang old songs around the fires, Lada returned to her room. She sat by the window and listened, not to chants, not to cries, but to the ordinary sounds of life. Crickets, wind, laughter, and beneath it all, a silence that felt earned. She picked up her recorder one last time, her voice calm, clear. Final log, Wat Mod Noi, Mae Mode, the child, the rituals, the echoes. She paused. This was never a haunting. It was a birth without a cradle, a song without an ending, a spirit that was never angry, only waiting to be completed. Another pause. I rang the bell. Her voice broke. And it didn't call anything. It released everything. She pressed stop, then leaned back, closed her eyes, and whispered, not to anyone living or dead, but to herself, "You can rest now."
Lada stayed in the village for 3 more days, not because she had to, but because she couldn't yet bear to leave. Wat Mat Noi had gone silent, not in the fearful way it had once been, not the silence of things buried, but the silence of things complete, a sacred hush, the hush of a cradle finally empty. She spent those final days walking alone, retracing her steps, the 3-trunk fig tree, where offerings still swayed in the breeze, the river bend where red water had once run, the path through the forest where the air no longer held its breath, and the temple, still broken, still breathing, still sacred. One morning, Samorn handed her a cloth bundle before dawn. No explanation. Inside was a small, handmade book. The pages were filled with ink smudges, faded symbols, and careful sketches, most too old to decipher. But on the last page, written in new handwriting, were 6 words. Sing only when it's time again. No signature, just the weight of meaning. Lada understood. The rituals were not destroyed. They were sleeping. Until the world forgot again. Until someone else would need to remember. On her final day, Lada stood at the village's edge, bag slung over her shoulder, scarf tied loosely at her wrist. Not red, not ceremonial, just cotton, worn, clean. And in her chest, something strange bloomed. Not fear, not even sorrow, but space. An emptiness that felt like healing, like a womb that had been closed, not from loss, but from release. Back in the city, she tried to return to her old life. Lecture halls, research proposals, dissertations. But her fingers hesitated over keyboards. Words came slower. Because now she knew. Some stories can't be written, only whispered. Months passed. She gave a guest lecture once, spoke briefly of spirit midwifery in rural Thailand, glossed over the rituals, the chant, the bell. But as she left the room, a student stopped her in the hallway. Quiet, pale, eyes tired, and asked, "Have you ever heard a lullaby that doesn't end?" Lada met her gaze and simply nodded. Later that night, she pulled out her recorder, not to document, not to archive, but to speak. To her, to Mae Maud, to the child, to whatever had passed through her. Her voice soft, even, no longer afraid. She whispered, "I still hear you sometimes, not like before, not from inside, but from behind the walls, the corners of mirrors, in the silence between breaths." She paused. "It's not haunting, it's remembering." She turned off the recorder, but her voice continued, not aloud, within. A presence, not watching, not possessing, but resting, like a song that lingers after the music has stopped. She dreamed again that night, for the first time in months. No chants, no blood, no broken bells. Just a cradle beneath a tree, rocking gently, empty, peaceful,
and above it, a woman's voice, hers, humming softly, not to summon, not to mourn, but to say goodbye. In the morning, she wrote a single sentence in the back of the book Simorn gave her. She was never angry, only unfinished. Then closed it, wrapped it in silk, and placed it in her drawer, waiting for the day someone else would ask, "Why does the temple still sing?" Because some voices are never born to scream. They are born to echo, to live in lullabies, in footsteps, in breath, to return not with rage, but with a whisper. The voice of the unborn does not fade. It waits, softly, patiently, until someone listens again.